in Spain and in America, they had far more significant body counts, much more severe. But they got to frame what was happening to them as something about outside forces coming in. We don't get that luxury at all. What happened to us came from inside this country. And I think we had a small spasm after that, and that spasm is still going on. We started questioning what our values are, what we mean as a country. And suddenly this talk of Britishness is pervading everywhere in a way that you simply don't get in other countries. The Americans know what Americanism is. The French certainly do. And I'm going to use those two countries as examples throughout this. So I'm going to start just by talking briefly about how I conceive of Britain. This is all entirely personal. Please feel free to shout out rubbish at me whenever you choose. I look at Britain as a ragtag nation of immigrants, and I think it always has been. We can go back to the Anglo-Saxons, the Normans, or we can look at Polish plumbers. This is deeply entrenched in our history. During the Victorian era, when this country was most homogenous, actually, we accepted people that the rest of Europe had barred. Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital here, Lenin walked around here, and in the home of capitalism. Kropotkin and Bakunin began to formulate the beginnings of anarchist theory. Then later on, around the turn of the century, French intelligence services started calling this city Londonistan because of how free many Islamic groups, many radical Islamic groups, were able to just set up camp here. Some people call us tolerant because of that. They call us a tolerant society, but I don't actually think that that's particularly accurate. I don't think that the British are tolerant at all. I think they're actually quite judgmental. I think they're certainly very stroppy. However, they are quite indifferent to what other people get up to, and that translates into a form of tolerance. The way I conceive of Britain is as one of the least absolute countries on earth, an anti-absolute country. I'm going to say what I mean by that. Other countries, when they talk about themselves in very absolute terms. The French talk about liberté, égalité, fraternity, which translates as this sort of very community-minded, socially spirited idea of the country, that, you know, closing the shops on Sundays, that sort of thing. The Americans talk about, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's all about the self-made man, you know, working himself up, you know, good day's pay for a hard day's work. The Japanese wrap up their national identity in ideas about diligence and honour. I would say that Britain's much more complicated than that. We're a very private country. We have strong social rules. But we tend to allow people to do whatever they like as long as they don't interfere with the freedom of others. I think that's one of the central ideas that this country is based on. John Stuart Mill, who was the first person to formulate that theory, was British, properly formulated anyway. He was British, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that that idea of getting on with your business as long as you affect nobody else is an innately British idea that had to originate in this country. I think that's why traditionally this country is so suspicious of the state and private enterprise. Unlike the French, who were very suspicious of private enterprise, and the Americans, who were very suspicious of the state. I think it's one of the reasons that we value eccentricity so much in this country, and why we produce so many eccentrics. Why we talk about the words nosy Parker or busybody is pretty much the ultimate insult, and why we have this phrase, an Englishman's home is his castle, which essentially means you leave me alone when I'm in my private space. And I also think that our society, our way of organising our country is under threat. I think it's under threat from 4 different places. One of them is still Islamic terrorism, which is a movement that is based on actually some pretty real grievances about foreign policy, but also a conception of making a world state that follows very puritanical moral rules. We're also under threat from the extreme right. I think you will see on June the 4th, very soon during the European and local elections, how severe that threat can be. I think we're at threat from the Home Office, which has tried to protect us against the two factors that I just described in probably the least British way imaginable, by trampling over our personal freedoms, by introducing concepts such as ID cards, which Margaret Thatcher rather wonderfully called a Germanic concept. The Home Office now plans to track, and is in fact in the process of tracking, all of our phone calls, our journeys by car, our emails, the internet sites that we visit. I think that way of operating is an innately un-British way. And finally, we're under threat from the political class in this country. Labour and Tories have both made references over and over to how they would like us to become a little more French, a little more American. In reacting to the terrorist threat to that video, they've looked to France and America. Now, France insists that immigrants abide entirely by its national culture. It forces Muslim women to remove their hijab headscarves when they enter public buildings in loyalty to the secular state. It tries to create this sterile space in the middle of the country where everyone must conform, behave the same way. America replaces that secularism with patriotism. Every morning, children go to school, they put their hands on their heart, and swear allegiance to a flag. And now, I am aware of where I am, but nevertheless, I will say that I am actually, I am slightly suspicious of flags. I like the way the British treat their flag. I'm very wary of how America behaves towards its flag, because I'm a patriot. But I know where patriotism can go if you're not careful. And if we reduce a love of country to a symbol, if we suck the meaning out of it, the words, it's very easy to turn love of country into blind obedience. And so I am very cautious of the American example in this sense. I think that you can learn a lot about a country by the way that it treats its immigrants, by the way it expects its immigrants to behave. France forces them to abide by secularism. America insists that they endlessly affirm their love for their new country. Now, in Britain, we've always allowed people to live in their own enclave, in their own culture, as long as, of course, they show loyalty to the state, of course. It's because of that that we've ended up with terrorist criminals with the same accents as us, trying to blow us up. But I don't think that that means that this project has been a failure. And I don't think that that means that the British way of life is a failure. Politicians have been trying and will continue to try what Britishness is, and what immigrants have to do to fit into this country. When they do that, they're turning us into France, they're turning us into America. I don't believe that we have anything to learn from those two countries in this sense. I think we have the ideal system here already. It's one of the ironies of living in a tolerant society that you have to show absolute intolerance towards the intolerant. To put it another way, one of the price of living in a free country is that we have to take away the freedom of those who want to end the free society. So yes, we do have to handle these challenges. But these people who want to change our country, Islamic fascists, extreme right-wingers, authoritarian government agencies, and Tory and Labour MPs, they do have to be stopped, because their quest to define Britishness is merely another chapter in that scheme. They will define us with an absolute. Once the government can tell us what Britishness is, they can tell us which ones of us don't fit. It will start with Muslims, radicals, and also some Muslims who aren't radical, and just question government policy, often for very good reasons. And it will end with those of us who don't like it when the government interferes in our private lives. I think that you've probably heard the phrase anti-American. You will have never heard the phrase anti-British. I think you should be very proud that that's the case. Britain isn't like that. It isn't absolute, and it isn't singular. Britain is about having the freedom to get on with your own business. That sounds very flippant, but I don't think it is. I actually consider that one of the most remarkable and beautiful national characteristics on earth.